This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
Hey, former Congressman Joe Walsh, White Flag with Joe Walsh. Thank you for listening. War in the Middle East again, and there are very few people I wanted to speak with more than my guest today, David Rothkopf. He's got a column in the Daily Beast, CEO of Deep State Radio, longtime national security, foreign policy expert. You see him on TV all the time, everywhere, spouting his acumen and intelligence. If you're not following David on Twitter, please do. At DJ ROTHKOPF, David Rothkopf. David, thank you. Welcome. We talked offline there about everything going on Israel and Gaza right now, and maybe I jumped ahead of my skis, and I said off the top, the headline is, I think you and I fundamentally disagree on what the problem is and what Israel needs to do. Maybe we don't. Let's jump right into it. You wrote a fascinating piece in the Daily Beast this week, headlined, "It's dangerous for the U.S. to give Israel a blank check to assault Gaza." I want to go through like 4 to 5 concrete things you said in this article and discuss them, my friend. Let's start with this. You said in there, Hamas committed boom, 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 all these horrible, butcherous atrocities. And then you said that require a resolute and unflinching response. Let's just start here. What is that response? What should it be?
Well, I think the response sort of takes several steps. The first step is going to be going after the Hamas terrorists. And I think the objective of eliminating Hamas terrorists and decapitating Hamas is what any state would do, and defensible in every respect.
So my friend, let me stop you there, because I didn't know that's where you were going. Okay, I've been out there doing my thing, screaming, Hamas needs to be wiped off the face of the earth, period. You generally concur with that?
I generally concur with it, although I do think that what we have seen historically in the Middle East is efforts to eliminate terrorist groups that have collateral damage tend to actually expand the terrorist groups. And so, we had a very sensible, understandable mission in the wake of 9/11, which would be to go after and destroy Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. But when we then went into Iraq and we, went into Afghanistan for 20 years, the result was that there are more terrorists in the world today than there were on 9/11.
David, completely agree with you there. Our overreaction to 9/11, completely agree with you. Here's my question.
And I just
continue.
But I just want to say, that's where my concern lies with the Israelis going into Gaza. Not because they're going after Hamas, which they should, but because we have enough information to know that they are likely to do it in a way where there's huge collateral damage in Gaza. And not only is that wrong from a humanitarian perspective, but I believe it will undermine the overall goal of enhancing security, making the Israeli people safer, and making the situation in the region more stable.
So, my friend and expert, how the heck do you thread that needle? Hamas needs to be wiped off the face of the earth. Gaza, basically, we're talking, as you know, my friend, about 16 to 18 years of terrorist infrastructure purposely embedded within civilian civilizations and buildings and all of the rest. So they are entwined. So,
They
but it doesn't seem fair, David, and then respond that this is a difficult chore of Israel's. And if they're gonna eliminate Hamas with this setting that Hamas has purposely set up, how do you do it, my friend?
Well, the first thing you do is listen carefully to what President Biden said. The speech that President Biden gave was widely embraced within Israel.
Yeah.
But President Biden was quite clear. We stand by Israel. We support Israel in every way that they need support. We decry the inhumane actions of Hamas. And we believe that Israel has a right to self-defense within the bounds of international law.
Yes.
And, the first thing they did was turn off all the water and gas and electricity to Gaza, which is a violation of international law.
Can I
2.2? Well, I'm just saying.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying it is, and there are 2.2 million people in Gaza, and hospitals are now struggling to take care of their patients and so forth. And so the question for the Israelis is not what their objective is; it's to eliminate Hamas. The question is, are they willing to do that in the kind of surgical and slow way that will be less satisfying given the crimes that we've seen, but ultimately more likely to serve their objectives? And by the way, there are other steps they have to take. In 2019, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, we'd rather have Hamas running the Palestinians in Gaza.
Right.
And the reason is he doesn't want there to be a Palestinian government. He doesn't want there to be good representation for the Palestinian people. And he wants justification for the extreme policies of his administration. And so having Hamas in charge helps them. By the way, Hamas, when Netanyahu ran for re-election, said they'd rather have him be the prime minister. Why? Because he is extreme, and he makes it easier for them to justify their policies. So there needs to be a step back and a recognition before you start that the end game is finding some kind of effective working governance for the Palestinian people that isn't Hamas.
So I would, David, I would put, and again, I know this is your area, and I'm just a former congressman, but I'll push back on the international law aspect that what Israel is doing, the siege, cutting off electricity, water, food, all the rest. Again, I've seen both sides of this. They're not deliberately aiming to starve the local population. If its aim is to defeat Hamas and deprive them of resources, in my mind, they're not violating international law. But I don't want to argue about that for the next half hour. David, if our goal is to eliminate Hamas, and Hamas has purposely set up Gaza to where there's almost zero difference between civilian buildings and terrorist buildings, you got to cut Israel some slack here, correct?
Look, I think you do, but I think
and that was a poor way to phrase it. I apologize
I think
for that.
The burden of defending the standards of civilization lies on those who are
civilized,
outraged, but who are also outraged and decrying those who violate those standards. And so, is it hard to wage a war in an environment like Gaza against a group like Hamas? It is extremely hard. Is it dangerous? It is extremely dangerous.
And by the way, David, you would concur that this has always been the CNN strategy, part of Hamas's strategy, to basically use their citizens as human shields, set up headquarters underneath hospitals, and all the rest. This is part of their strategy.
That is their strategy. From the beginning of the Intifada, the objective was go taunt the Israelis, count on the Israelis to overreact, count on media to take a picture of the Israelis overreacting and use that to generate international support. And it has worked every time. And in the 2014 war in Gaza, there were 2,500 Gazans who died and 66 Israelis. And, you know, the Israelis said it was justified, but the rest of the world said that formula doesn't work. And I have seen, you know, I mean, I just saw this morning somebody who happened to be on TV with yesterday, Danielle Pletka, make a statement, war is hell. And I've seen a lot of tough people get on TV and go, war is hell. You know, I was on MSNBC and I was talking about, you know, using some restraint. And Jose Diaz-Balart said to me, restraint? Hamas didn't use restraint. Don't the Israelis have the right to? And I was like, whoa, dude, you know, it's very easy for you to sit there in your chair and sound tough.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
But the goal here is not simply retribution. Retribution is not a strategy. Retribution doesn't make Israelis safer.
Agreed.
The goal is to make Israelis safer.
Agreed. And I would, David, I would say, if I had been on that panel on MSNBC with you, I would have said, no, now is not the time for restraint within the bounds of international law. I would clearly make that distinction. You and I are going to disagree on what, I don't believe what Israel is doing right now is against international law. We'll fight about
No, I don't. Look, we can have a debate because we're in the gray zone period.
Yeah.
What I'm worried about is in the next few days we won't be in the gray zone period, and we already are not quite sure what has happened with a lot of the bombings and what the toll has been on that. But I'm just saying, I am concerned that justifiably horrified and angry Israel is going to overstep, overkill, and thereby weaken their standing and make peace and stability less likely.
I hear that concern and I respect that concern. And my concern is no matter what, this is a trap. This is a trap that Israel has been in forever with Hamas and the Palestine and Gaza. And no matter what Israel does, the usual people around the world are going to criticize Israel. Let's move to my second question I wanted to raise with you. You said the response has got to, most importantly, break the cycle of violence. This leads to what we're talking about. David, what is that cycle? Because in my mind, the cycle always is Hamas, Islamic terrorists attack Israel, Israel retaliates, the world criticizes Israel. And the reason we have this cycle is because Hamas, Hezbollah, and so many of Israel's neighbors fundamentally are pledged to Israel's destruction. That's my editorial comment. What is, in your mind, the cycle that you want to break?
Well, I mean, certainly what you describe has been historically the situation for the past 80 years since the establishment of the State of Israel. But having said that, the situation in the past several decades has been somewhat different. Israel is widely acknowledged as the strongest force in the region. Israel is widely appreciated to be a military that no one of its neighbors wants to engage with.
Right.
With the possible exception of the Iranians, and we can come back to them if we want. And, you know, having said that, the reality is that most of Israel's neighbors are not at war with Israel now. Egypt's not. Jordan is not. Certainly in the Gulf with Abraham Accords, they have stepped away from that. The Saudis have wanted to step away from that. And so the threats to Israel are not what the threats once were. And again,
David, can I ask you a question about that?
I think the exception to that is Iran and Iranian proxies in the region.
So I want to ask you a question about that because you raised a great point in that I think a big part of why Iran did what they did with this attack with Hamas was because they're trying to stop Israel's developing relations with these moderate Arab countries, which, by the way, you and I agree is a good thing, right? That Israel and these moderate Arab countries are developing relationships, and Iran using Hamas and Hezbollah is trying to stop that. But you do concur that, or do you concur with a lot of these, Jordan and Egypt, Saudi Arabia, these moderate countries over the years have used the Palestinian issue and allowed it to fester to help make a case against Israel? No?
I think in the past they have. I think more recently they have paid lip service to it. Mm-hmm. I think one of the many triggers for the recent events, and it's just one of many, was that the likelihood was that the Israelis and the Saudis were going to enter a deal,
right,
in which the goals of the Israelis and the Saudis really were divergent, and in both cases led them to essentially want to throw the Palestinian issue under the bus.
Exactly.
They just wanted to pay lip service to it. And I think part of what Hamas wanted to do was Iran's bidding. Iran doesn't want that deal. But part of what Hamas wanted to do was to restore the Palestinian issue to the center of the discussion. And that is in part because other countries in the region just frankly aren't that concerned with it anymore. And I think that's wrong.
Completely. That's a big part of the problem, isn't it, David?
Yeah, it is. And I think the Palestinian people, like any other people, deserve their own state. They deserve the right of self-determination. They deserve the ability to flourish or proceed along any path they choose. And that has been an option that's been denied them for decades and decades and generations. And, there are a lot of people I know, sort of smart Middle East types, who will say, two-state solution is dead. That'll never happen. And, that's because the current Israeli government isn't into that. And that's because the Palestinians have embraced a policy largely of saying, well, we'll just wait because demography is on our side. And sooner or later, you're going to have so many Palestinians in and around Israel that you either go full apartheid, they're already pretty close, or you give us the vote, in which case you're not going to be a Jewish state anymore.
Hey, David, and go ahead, continue.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, my sense is that this is the central issue, and that there actually is no other solution than a Palestinian state. You get a choice. You either get a Palestinian state and a democratic Israel, or you get an undemocratic Israel. Those are the two options.
I would, and respond to this, my friend, and I will respectfully slap you upside the head. I think the notion of a two-state solution, two neighbors living side by side, and look, I'm tired of Netanyahu like you are. I don't. He's not the fundamental problem here, and I obviously don't think Israel is. Two neighbors living in peace and harmony side by side, when one of those neighbors, and it's still the case, Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, Hezbollah, fundamentally do not believe Israel has a right to exist, and they're pledged to the destruction of Israel. I don't know, David, to me, that's the fundamental issue. One side, since 1948, from the beginning has said they don't have a right to exist. Every Jew must be killed from the river to the sea. That's, to me, always been the biggest impediment to peace, no matter what problems you've gotten with how Israel's responded to that. One of the neighbors doesn't think the other neighbor has a right to live, David.
Let me say several things in response to that. First, you would have said that was the position of Egypt. It's no longer the position of Egypt. You would have said that was the position of Jordan. It was no longer the position of Jordan. You would have said that was the position of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. It is no longer the position of those
David,
countries.
can I ask you one question? And I will believe and trust your answer. Do you think deep down Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, deep down, do those regimes in those countries still believe Or do they believe Israel has a right to exist? Or even do they even deep down believe Israel doesn't have a right to exist?
No, look, it's very important to make a distinction between some of the people and all the people in these countries and the governments of these countries and the populations of these countries.
Yeah.
And there are people in all of those countries who have extreme views. I think the majority of people just want to lead normal lives. I think the reason that you got some traction with the Abraham Accords is most of the people in the region see Israel as a fairly successful economy and want to take advantage of the existence of that economy. And many of them, the divisions between the Arab states in the region have also long been bitter.
Yeah.
And they tend to be able to work with that. I think, also with regard to the Palestinians, while there are some among the Palestinians who have held that position, in part they've held that position because they have not been granted autonomy themselves. And while people in Israel offer a range of views on this, there are plenty of people in Israel who don't think the Palestinians deserve their own state, think Israel has the right to impose their will on the Palestinians, think the Palestinians should operate under apartheid rules with fewer rights. And that's also a problem. And so, the question is, how do you get around that problem? And, I think if
but my friend,
you would find in a poll, the vast majority of Israelis would like to see an independent and secure Palestinian state, and the vast majority of Palestinians would like that as well.
David, does the polling tell us that about the Palestinians? I would say most Palestinians do not believe Israel has a right to exist. But I'm not.
I can't cite a recent poll.
Okay.
I know the views in Gaza are different from the views in the West Bank. And I know the views of Arabs living in Israel are different from the views of Arabs living in the territories. But I do think that regardless of all of that, if you believe, we talk a lot about Israel and our shared values.
Yeah.
There's been some divergence in those values in the past couple of years. If you believe that Israel has as one of its core strengths that it is a democracy, and one of the core precepts of a democracy is one person, one vote, then you are close to the point where demographics says Israel's not a Jewish state, it's a Palestinian state, because they are approaching being the majority. If you do not believe that you should have that independent state, then you have to buy into the notion that Israel can impose its will on this other people as second-class citizens in perpetuity.
So David, what if then let's you and I do a great grand bargain. Let's hold hands. Israel should take back control of Gaza. The West Bank should be Israel. Make it all Israel, because Arabs who live in Israel are happier, freer, more prosperous than in surrounding countries. Make it all Israel and let the demographics be what they're going to be, and everybody will live in peace and harmony.
Well,
how about that?
Good luck persuading Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition.
Is it just Netanyahu?
Because sure. No, but there are a bunch of people in Israel
who would oppose that.
Who would oppose it because it would instantly shift the balance of power in the country. And there is a fundamental issue, another issue which we haven't talked about here, which was Israel was founded as a Jewish state. And because it was founded as a Jewish state, and because that's core to its identity, the idea of a demographic shift, all of a sudden erasing that, is anathema to a lot of these people who also believe that for a variety of other reasons in the world, the Jews need a safe haven, a safe home.
Yes.
And so if you want to have a Jewish state, then you can't have a democratic state. And if you want to have a democratic state, you can't have a Jewish state unless you have two states. It's just arithmetic.
Okay. Agreed. But right now, David, and it's been the case that it's impossible to have two states because one of the states, certainly the Palestinians through their ruling governments, are pledged to Israel's destruction. So that has to change. That has to change.
And the reality is that, step one, I think, would be that the Israeli government should not seek to undermine whatever the legitimately chosen government of the Palestinians are, and promote extremists like Hamas because they'd rather be fighting extremists. But this is all going to be a process, and I acknowledged at the outset that there are a lot of skeptics for this process, and there are some people who think there needs to be a 3-state solution.
Yeah,
and I don't think that works, given issues of scale and security. And so, at the end of the day, just because a solution appears to be impossible doesn't mean it's not the best solution. And the best solution is the right of self-determination for the people of the region, including all the Jews and all the Palestinians. And I think if you left them with that right of self-determination, you're going to end up with 2 states one way or another.
And the problem, David, is, and this is what Israel's living with, they get out of Gaza in 2005, and Gaza becomes a shithole and basically a terror camp that lobs rockets at Israel all the time. They get out of Lebanon, the chunk of Lebanon, and Hezbollah, same thing, becomes a terror base. They still control the West Bank, and there are no rockets being lobbed from the West Bank. So look, this is, and part of what I would it advises, they have to take out Hamas, and maybe, I know you're not going to like this, but take back control of Gaza. Right now, Gaza is a terror camp. They control the West Bank, and there are not rockets coming from the West Bank every day.
I don't think there are any Israelis that want to be responsible for the education, healthcare, sewage, and economic future of Gaza. And I think that's the reason they don't want to own it. It is a huge humanitarian crisis. The reality is that to some extent, Hamas is the leader there because other groups were undermined. And to some extent, Hamas has support there because the conditions there are so terrible. And
hey, David, the conditions in Gaza are terrible because of Hamas. Would you concur with that? Over the last 16 to 17 years, you would not.
No. I would say the conditions in Gaza are terrible because of Hamas and because of Israel. And I think you have to accept both of those things because it is essentially walled off. It is very difficult for people there to interact with the functioning economy of Israel. It is super crowded, and there's a lot of human suffering going on in there.
Hamas deserves a lion's share of the blame. Certainly, you would say some of the blame.
Deserves a ton. No, Hamas deserves a ton of the blame. Hamas is a terrible group. The Iranians have seen to it that it has got the wrong priorities and is a terrible group. Hamas should not be in charge under any circumstances. I think we both agree that it's time to move on. But if you're going to move on and the Israelis don't want to take over Gaza, and they don't.
David, but I wonder if that's changed. To me, October 7th changed a fucking lot. I think it
has, but I still have not heard Israelis say that they want to go back and control Gaza. Quite the contrary. I don't think they want to own it. And I think that the only way out is to find some kind of self-rule that they also feel is secure. We're a long way from that. But I'll tell you one thing. The discussion we're having about the governance of Gaza is the discussion.
Completely.
The discussion about how many Hamas people we kill and how quickly is is understandable. It may be the pursuit of justice, but it is secondary to this issue because only a political solution leads you to a lasting human solution here, and every military solution has failed to do that.
Agreed, but David, how we get to that issue that you and I are talking about, what do we do with Gaza? We don't get there, in my mind, until Hamas is eliminated, and that takes us back to the beginning. This is going to be difficult for Israel to do.
No question about it. I think, you're never. I don't think you're going to eliminate Hamas. I think you're going to potentially decapitate Hamas, and I think that would be a good objective. And I think you may be able to eliminate the capabilities of Hamas for a long time to come. But whether you're going to eliminate the political motivations for people to become extremists in Gaza, I don't think you're going to be able to do until you find a different governance solution for Gaza. And by the way, another possibility is an international solution,
right?
Which again, the Israelis are skeptical of. But you and I could be making war plans for Israel right now,
right?
And I think where we would be having a debate is how quickly Israel should go in and try to do what it's doing. And what constitutes a success. And, if a success means eradication of anything that looks, smells, or acts like Hamas, the collateral damage associated with that is going to be quantum levels greater than if success is let's decapitate Hamas, let's eliminate its stores of weapons, let's eliminate its abilities to connect with Iran and the rest of the world. Let's eliminate its sources of funding. So I think again, we would have a debate about with.
Yeah, I think that ship sailed. I think it is. I think October 7th changed things to the good in the sense that Israel now is going to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth. And I think the region would be better if it did, but I concur it's going to be difficult.
Well, the most powerful nation on earth, the United States, said its goal was to eliminate Al-Qaeda off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
There's more Al-Qaeda today than there was on 9/11. We said our goal was to eliminate ISIS off the face of this earth. We've killed leader after leader from ISIS. ISIS is not the threat that it was originally, but
neither one is.
Subsets of ISIS,
and neither one is really a threat right now. I mean, they're always a threat.
No, that's not true. But in Al-Qaeda in Yemen, Al-Qaeda in Mali, Al-Qaeda in elsewhere in the Arabian Peninsula, these are threats. And groups like ISIS continue to be threats. And all I'm saying is 100% isn't a reasonable goal. And so you have to say, what's your metric? And I think the metric is what achieves the adequate level of security for the people of Israel. And
improves life for the Palestinian people.
Well, that's right. And you don't improve the life of the Palestinian people by having thousands and thousands of dead Palestinians.
Do you improve the lives of the Palestinian people if you wipe Hamas off the face of the earth as best as you can?
The answer to that, and I don't want to sound weaselly about it, is at what cost? And I think the answer is yes, provided that the cost is tolerable. And I just don't know what it is, Joe. And it may be that the Israelis are going to be able to go in, do this surgically, achieve the goal, get out. There'll be some collateral damage. It won't be huge collateral damage. And we'll all say, well done, folks. Now let's turn the page. But I worry, because that has never been the case in the past, that the collateral damage will be so large that even if you eliminate Hamas, what you're going to do is create the breeding ground for Hamas 2.0. And I also worry that you're going to do it in a way that is going to undermine international support for Israel, which has a consequence. because the collateral damage is so great. And finally,
Go ahead.
and most importantly, I worry because the ultimate solution has to be political. And so if you do not focus on your end goal when you're planning stage one, you're not going to get to the end goal.
David, I love you, and that makes so much sense, but this is 75 years of just so unfair to the state of Israel. I know what your response is going to be, and I respect it, but we demand so much and expect so much, and this little miracle of a country has been plopped right there, and for 75 years, every fucking day, they've lived with people trying to knock them out of existence, and they engage in attacks, these terrorists do, and Israel responds, and the world shits on Israel. It's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair. That cycle, David, my friend, that has to change.
It has to change, but let me tell you something, and I don't want to sort of, play the personal tie card here.
That's okay.
My dad, when his family was being killed by the Nazis, was a Zionist youth and believed in the idea of Israel when he escaped to the United States, and essentially all of his family, 40 relatives, were killed by the Nazis. It was always presented to me as an ideal, and I embraced that ideal. But I have to tell you, there have been abuses on the Israeli side too, and stripping away the rights of Palestinians, stripping away the lands of Palestinians, annexing settlements, extremist violence against Palestinians going unchecked. The Israelis have a lot to answer for in their mistreatment and mishandling of this problem.
I want to stop you there because I know you're gonna say something else, but I want to stop you there and ask a question based on what you just said. Israel clearly is not and has not handled themselves perfectly for 75 years. To me, everything has been reactive. But that aside, there's zero moral equivalence. As much as you and I may be sick of Netanyahu and the current Israeli government, there's zero moral equivalence between, say, Hamas and Hezbollah and the Israeli government.
Of course there's zero.
Okay.
Of course there's zero. But that doesn't address the core issue. The core issue is, how do you get to peace? How do you get to stability? What are the choices that you're making? And this was a government that not only was dismantling democracy in Israel, but was planning on annexing. There are two people in the Netanyahu administration who were convicted by the Israeli government of being terrorists. This is a group that is so extreme, and what they are doing to Palestinians is so extreme. And literally weeks before this, had ministers calling for the death of Palestinians in the streets. But again,
not nearly at the scale of what we see on the other side.
Not at the scale, but I'll tell you something. Scale doesn't matter if you're the mother of a dead child, and so I do not want to get into the moral equivalence game. I want to stay focused on the how do you solve this problem game, and it's easy in moments like this, to lose our bearings, and to get caught up in the righteous fury of the moment.
Agreed.
And we've just got to take a step back and say, I feel it, I seek justice, but ultimately, how do I serve the interests of the people I care about here?
Agreed.
And the way you serve the interests of the people you care about is finding an effective political solution. And 75 years have taught us a lot. And one of the things it has taught us is that no military solution has worked. And Israel, if you had told the Israelis 75 years ago that they would be the most powerful military force in the Middle East, by far the only nuclear nation with the backing of the world's only superpower, and they still wouldn't be safe, they would tell you that was ludicrous.
Okay, well, you know what? Maybe back then they would have. Now they wouldn't, because strong military or whatever, again, they're living next to people who want to destroy them. But I hear and I don't want to get into the moral equivalence game. I'm going to believe that you agree with me that there's a fundamental difference between a Hamas terrorist targeting and raping and killing a child, and Palestinian children as collateral damage because of an Israel airstrike. I mean, I think, but David, if you disagree, tell me. To me, civilian Palestinian deaths, Israel would say it's a necessary evil, whereas for Hamas, it's the objective.
Look, if we were sitting in judgment one by one of the people who commit the crimes, and there was a Hamas terrorist who raped a woman and killed her, or stole a grandmother from her family and held her hostage, and they were presented with all the choices they had in life, and that's what they chose to do, they deserve the harshest judgment. And if it's a 22-year-old Israeli operating an artillery piece that fires a gun into, Gaza in an effort to kill Hamas, and there's collateral damage, that I would not say they are necessarily guilty in the same way.
Thank you.
But if I'm the mother of the dead child, I don't care about the distinction. And if my goal is achieving lasting peace in the region, then I don't care about this debate.
So David then, solutions. What if Israel, in more proper language than me, just said, okay, fuck it. Gaza, it ain't ours. No blockade, no nothing. It's yours. We're done. We don't even care about Gaza. Palestinian people, it's yours. Egypt, whatever, you guys do whatever you want. We will have no direct or indirect connection to Gaza. I mean, they left in 2005, kind of did this, but the blockade, the occupation, whatever you want to call it, they left everything and just washed their hands completely of Gaza. What would happen? Completely, David.
Well, because first of all, if the Israelis did that, as
what would happen?
Sort of what had happened is they'll build walls around Gaza. They'll put military bases.
Let's say no walls and bases. It's our neighboring country.
But they're not going to do that.
Why?
Because it's a neighboring country. Because they don't control what's happening within its borders. Because they saw what happened when somebody put a bulldozer through the fence on October 7th. And there's no way the Israelis just sort of say, okay, it's fine. You're now our neighbor. We're going to assume.
Why? Why not? Why not, David? Why?
Because they wouldn't assume they would be peaceful.
But no. But from your perspective, why? Because I get a lot of people who ask me this. End the blockade, end the occupation. You're our neighbor. Hello. What's wrong with that?
Look, ultimately, that is the only solution. Ultimately,
so do it.
Two mutually respecting states that are actually economically integrated with one another, and that can benefit from the fact that the Palestinians have a long history of being an intellectually accomplished, internationally engaged population, and know better how to work with the Israelis than any other people in the region. Ultimately, these two side-by-side, fairly synergistic states is the best solution.
So David, my dear friend, why not do that?
Well, because you don't get from A to B without getting to A and a half and A and three quarters. It's
because what would happen if Israel did that? No blockade, no occupation, no nothing, no walls, no nothing.
At the very outset, there would still be elements within Gaza that posed a threat. And the minute that those elements within Gaza sought to take advantage of the hugely difficult conditions in Gaza to gain support for acting as a terrorist again, they would lash out against Israel, and Israel would say, we're closing the border.
So, okay, but David, Again, this is fascinating to me. If Israel gave Hamas and the Palestinian people and everybody else what they want, total freedom and ownership of Gaza, to me, this is the endemic problem. Neighbor to neighbor, neighbor by neighbor, living in harmony. One of the neighbors, and you agree at the outset, is not going to live in harmony. And I would argue that that neighbor will probably never live in harmony. And this is fundamentally Israel's problem. They can't let that thing be free.
Well, I honestly think that the ultimate solution for Israel is to get to that point. I don't think you get to that point in one step. I also don't think you get to that point with the way Israel has carved away at the West Bank and tried to impose settlements across it and is essentially trying to neutralize the West Bank as a unified political entity within the Palestinian world. And I think, at the end of the day, you need the West Bank and Gaza. You need some kind of sufficient scale for this to work as a country, and some kind of access to resources. I'll tell you a way to change the equation real quickly. It's not going to happen, but I'm just throwing it out there for you. Is that there's a lot of gas off the coast of Israel.
Yeah.
If half of that gas was considered to be off the coast of Palestine, and the Palestinians could make money off of that gas and have a profitable economy, people would be worried about different things.
Yeah, great. And then Hamas or who's ever ruling Gaza would put all that money in their pockets, their leaders would, and put it into bombs and all the other shit, which is, again, David, that's been their history.
Look, I don't think Hamas should be ruling.
Well,
look, but wait a second.
What?
Hamas was not the only option. There was an effort. I mean, and by the way, the PLO, which was was a pretty awful group.
Yes.
But the Palestinian Authority was undermined in part by the Israelis and in part by their own ineptitude. But they weren't Hamas, and other kinds of options exist. And I don't think it's fair to play out every scenario by saying Gaza will always be controlled by its most extreme elements. Israel will not always be controlled by its most extreme elements. If Israel is controlled by its most extreme elements, that's not good either. And I think that we have to create political systems where we hope a more sensible majority actually has some influence.
I think you and I concur as we wrap, my friend. I think you and I concur that if Israel got out of Gaza completely right now and got out of the West Bank completely, totally right now, that's what all my leftist friends want. Total freedom, total no occupation, no blockade, no nothing. Israel's existence right now would be in jeopardy. And I think for a long, long time, because I think the fundamental problem is in the West Bank and Lebanon and Gaza. Go ahead. Those people do not want to exist with Israel.
I know a lot of Israelis, a lot, and a lot who are in the military and the national security community. Yeah. Israel's existence is not in jeopardy. Period. It's not. The lives of Israeli people are at risk. That's a different thing. But this is not an existential crisis for Israel. It's not the same as Russia invading Ukraine. Russia wants to eliminate Ukraine and has the capacity to do it. Hamas does not have the capacity to eliminate Israel. But
not just Hamas. Right?
It's a threat.
Iran.
And if Iran were to take a step, and believe me, the Gerald R. Ford Carrier Battle Group that is off the coast of Israel ain't there for Hamas. It's there to send a message to Iran. And I think, at the end of the day, the big question is not how do you solve today's problem? And it's not even how do you get to the ideal solution? It's how do you get from today's problem to the ideal solution? And one of the ways you do that is you eliminate Hamas. But another way you have to do that is you have to eliminate the sponsors and instigators of Hamas at being a factor like Iran. And then another way you do that is you have to begin to work with the Palestinians to restore some kind of political function within their society so that they can make choices that are not
Do they want that,
extreme
David?
choices.
Right now, do they want that?
Look,
Come on,
who's
my friend.
they? No. This is, let's now, but maybe we'll get to the sparks that you always want in these discussions.
No, I love
but,
you too much.
But the answer is this: who's they? Does Hamas
The Palestinian
want that?
people. The Palestinian people.
Of course they do. If a mother is sitting there in her apartment trying to feed her kids, what she wants is to know that there will be enough food until the kid grows up and that the kid can go to college and have a decent life.
If there was an honest
That's what the
direct
mother
election,
wants.
if there was an honest direct election tomorrow in Gaza, a real election, would Hamas win or somebody else?
I
Hard to
don't
say.
know. Don't know. And there was a one election.
Yeah.
And it was like 18 years ago.
Yeah.
And Hamas won, and we're not sure whether that was fair.
Yeah.
And then there was never another election. And all I can say is, and you may want to direct this to some of your former friends in the Republican Party.
Uh-huh.
When political parties stop wanting to have fair elections, it is not because they're confident in the outcome of the elections.
Agreed. Oh, David, you and I are soulmates on that. I'm with you, my friend. Okay, I'm going to ask you two final quickies, and then I'm done with you because I know you're in demand right now. I think it was Golden.
Do I look forward to Speaker McCarthy? Is that going to be one of them?
Well, I have a weird feeling that might happen, David. They're so fucked up, these Republicans. I think it was Golda Meir that said that if the Palestinians laid down their arms tomorrow, there would be peace the next day. If Israel laid down all her arms tomorrow, Israel would be gone. I believe that. You don't, do you? Be honest with me. Be honest with me.
It's a different world, right? Golda Meir lived in a world in which every country on our borders was focused on not just the potential destruction of Israel, but the imminent destruction of Israel. And in fact, she got run out of office because they blew a call on intelligence prior to the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago.
Do you subscribe to that at all now, today still? You're hedging like a politician.
No, I'm not hedging. I'm trying to think through the answer. I don't have an answer off the top of my head. My sense is that it's a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Israel is never going to lay down its arms, and the Palestinians can't form a state in which they don't have their own right of self-defense. So it's just not a realistic question.
No, but it gets at, and this is what I love and respect you, and I learned so much from you. And respectfully, you avoided answering that. And then that's going to lead to my final question, David, because this is central to my belief that the fundamental impediment to peace in that region is the Palestinian people from the very beginning refusing to accept Israel's right to exist. If I asked you, David Rothkopf, what's the fundamental impediment to peace in the Middle East right now? Close us out. Answer that.
I don't think there's one fundamental obstacle to peace in the Middle East. And in fact, I think the biggest threat to peace in the Middle East is the tension between Iran, the Gulf states, and Israel. And I believe that a secondary threat to the stability of the region is the unconstructive engagement of Russia in Syria with Iran and with these other places. I believe, for a variety of reasons that are hard to acknowledge right now, that one of the reasons the Palestinian issue stopped being that important to all of the countries of the region was that there was this kind of stasis.
Yeah.
And people started to focus on, their own economic futures.
Yeah.
I hope that we can, by living through this horrible period, come to recognize that we can't just put the Palestinian issue on the shelf, and that these people have rights, and they have needs, and they have aspirations, and the world and the Israelis and the Palestinians have got to work together to find new mechanisms to respect and protect those rights.
This is why I respect the hell out of you, and this is why everybody should follow David on Twitter at DJ Rothkopf, Rothkopf. Read his columns every week in the Daily Beast. You'll see his handsome mug on MSNBC and CNN. I learned so much from him, and I'm one of his biggest cheerleaders. David, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.